항상 난 낭배기 다룹 난에다 저 디나이에나 지 낭배 다룹 난에 좀다 수수식이 지금 뭐라고 뭐 난이다 이제 좀다 땡유별로기 다룹게 남샤디마 안데 도스네 안데 그신도 대야시시에 도시고 조사라다.
Good evening. So we've started some time ago when we commenced with this text to look at the Buddhist view, the view on reality. And amongst the many different philosophical, or the several different philosophical tenets in the Buddha Dharma, we are looking at that of the supreme tenet, that of the Prasangika.
안디로와다 semgaripada 단나베 따룹니가 님도 차고래.
Amongst Buddhist psychology, or the various divisions of Buddhism, within that of Buddhist psychology, one finds the view of Buddhism.
아디니 자당 저기 그신 가르치버려라나. 당아저 지게 디기 유나다 디기 되어봐도 동아 미디어바래. 진짜 미디어바자 당한 동아 세대 간데스 용고래 세대가서 동아들라 누기 나자다 셈유 동아 안데네기 동아 규에 동아 차바두지 동아 세지 동아 숨쉬고 얼마 당한 나베기. 그래서 안에 데네기 동아디게 유가를 때네 용고래 랍나 아니 규레라 때네 용고래스. 안 레데 가르 때네 용고라스네 녀몽발레 때네 용고래스. The Nyomobadi Gugaril de Yungore, and the Zayu Tardo and Dasin Marikba Sine and Delet Yungore. She's not Dasin Marikba de Yungore. She's not Dunga Chasa Sewena, not Dasin Marikba, Dunga Yosig Zawa, Nyomobaki, you, and Dasin Marikba said the Bango Wores, the Bango Wores, and then I took it at the Dunga Tangazuki, Sem Garil de Yungore said the Dushine, and this. 동아여야 저기 규대 다시 말이 바래 디방고 거래세 디방발라 대위 남샤 동반이 또 비교로디 또네 검제 반마도 시행방도 말해야지.
When we started looking at the text, the first topic that was covered in the Key to the Middle Way was in the context of the recognition that all of us are the same in having the same deep inner yearning to experience only happiness and to be freed from all forms of pain and suffering. And following that recognition, the curiosity arises, all unwanted experiences of suffering, how do they come about? Why do we have to encounter suffering, pain and misery? And then the text continued, showing how suffering comes about in dependence on the ripening of karma that has been accumulated, and that karma that's been accumulated has been done so by under the influence or under the control of afflicted minds. And all the variety of afflicted minds that arise in our consciousness, they have at their root the ignorance of self-grasping. So therefore, we've come to see how the root cause of all our suffering, whether it's physical suffering or mental suffering, all of the suffering, both coarse and slight, comes about, or arises, or is experienced from this one root cause of the ignorance of self-grasping. Having recognized that, we recognize what it is that we need to abandon to attain freedom from suffering or liberation from suffering. That ignorance of self-grasping is what needs to be abandoned. Thereafter, we've come to the presentation then on how to abandon it. And in brief, to overcome an ignorance, one has to develop a wisdom, and not any wisdom, but the directly contrary wisdom. And the wisdom that is contrary to the ignorance of self-grasping is the wisdom realizing emptiness.
다진 시에디 시에도데 베네 다도 주바즈메 다진 시디텔레 다진데 강사 다진 추기 다진 이용으로 아주 다도 주바즈메 다진 람나 덴버 주바즈베 덴진 덴버 주바즈바 Rangunyo Juba, Rangi Tini Juba Zimba said, then Ming Kaka Dagor de Dondajiba, Dondajiba Chatter.
Ignorance of self-grasping can be expressed in different ways. It can be called either the ignorance of self-grasping or the ignorance of true grasping. And it can also be called the ignorance grasping at the self of persons or the self of phenomena. And instead of saying true grasping, that too has its own set of synonyms. So true grasping can be called true existence has as a synonym inherent existence or natural existence or existence by way of its own defining characteristics or existence by way of its own essence. So what we find here is a vast number of synonyms, but all of them are apprehended or grasped at by a mind of ignorance, a mind that's contrary to reality.
Dadonala Dadu Jubazime, Dazin Labide, Dazin Labna, Dadu Jubazing, Lodi Legorva. Then Dadu Juba says, Shago, you do la Karasan Dadu Jubache, and Ditsingore Legorva. Just on Dadu Juba said, Yorbe, your Maresina, Zawin, your Maris, or Dadu Juba says, Zawin, your Marwas, your Maregere, the Gacha said, the Gacha said.
Ignorance of self-grasping or the ignorance of true grasping, they are both consciousnesses that grasp at their object as being truly existent, or as was just said, as truly existent or inherently existent or naturally existent or existence by way of its own essence or its own characteristics. The only slight difference that can be made there is if the object is the self, it can be called either the ignorance of self-grasping or the ignorance of true grasping. If the object is something other than the self, one wouldn't call it the ignorance of self-grasping, but the ignorance of true grasping. That would be the only difference. But whether the self or another object is being grasped at as truly existent, this true existence doesn't exist. There is no such thing as true existence. It is a complete non-existence. And true existence itself is the object of negation, the object that is to be negated or refuted. So last time we looked at how to identify the object of negation, and the object of negation is true existence.
Diungwe me zimayin se chunju song so de jisadi dadu juba se di ganishre dambo nganzu lo ya yomare de mena ya dadu juba se yena ganish yogure se ji denigi dadu jubtang ti nganzu ya lo la sha wa ha wo wo re stambo di ha mo ba ina ani di ma ka nya dong ban yi do tu ma le se wo da di ka pe ge dong ban yi se do tu ma ga sa dadu juba ka pe ge 동배 동이디 동방이 있어요. 봐. 지자 다도 주바 세야디 간에 심바도 로라 샤지 뭐 마송바 있나 니까야기 탑싱 말와 마싱 바나 네 동배 동이세 도도 말해서 지자 다병원라 말해 봐시도 다도 주바 집에 가자 다도 주바 로라야 뭐 송고 그래 딩아 뭐 마송바 아니 딩어 메진바 있어도 디 동배 동이디 도도 말해서
As just mentioned, the object of negation is true existence. And it's imperative that this is identified or recognized. All phenomena appear to one as being truly existent or inherently existent. One then needs to recognize, identify what is true existence, and because it's only when one understands or identifies or recognizes what is true existence can one seek it out. And it's only through seeking it out will one come to know whether it can be found or not found. And when true existence has firstly been identified, secondly sought, and thirdly not found, does one realize that the object that is empty of true existence. And this is the realization of emptiness. But this sequence begins with identifying the object of negation, true existence. And that is the outline we looked at a month ago on page 5, identifying the object of negation. And this was presented through a quotation from Shantideva's Way of Life of Bodhisattvas. Without identifying the object to be investigated, its non-existence cannot be apprehended. This outline, identifying the object of negation on page 5, is of great importance because, as just mentioned, without identifying the object of negation, it cannot be negated, and therefore emptiness cannot be realized. Because of its great importance, I think it's worthwhile to spend a little bit of time reviewing what we looked at last time. The object of negation, as has been said, is true existence. And true existence has as synonyms inherent existence, natural existence, existence by way of its own essence, existence by way of its own defining characteristics. So it's good to know all these varying synonyms because they are used at different points in our text. So this is the object of negation. And this object of negation doesn't exist at all, yet it appears to our mind in that every object of consciousness appears as being truly existent. So if we take the self as an illustration, the self, or I, appears to us as being truly existent. And what does that mean then? If something is truly existent, it is the meaning of something being truly existent is it's independent. And in the case of the self then appears as being truly existent in that it appears to be independent of the physical and mental aggregates, independent of our body, independent of any one or the collection of our consciousnesses, independent of our body and mind, in that it appears as if it has no relationship with our body and mind, or it's not influenced by our body and mind. So this is how the self appears, and this is the meaning of true existence.
Temper to pass or tennis now to tell temper to pala gore, Rashin to bala gore, Rangit to pass, Kansa datu to pass and Dila gore. She's an Dikasa direda, Diomare, Dika Wanzuka, Kawara said, Ko Melzes Kayama, Hoyora Yomarwa, in a Kawara said, Manzulolia, Deniki Zingore, Longalia, Zinhead, Zimachu was a Kawara, or Kasa Gassi, Denika Kasa di Meo Yomare, Di Makawara city. Mena Karaka Yorelana, Nansu Lolia Zingore, Chesa Louis Zimban, Zimba the Zimba Chuache, Pagao, is longer Pagao, as a word. Longer the cow, what is it? Louis Morla, Lu Yul Yong Ma Jua Chica, what is a longer Lu Yulia, Yong Ma Jua Chica, what is a Gawin. As gas the Yobaji Mevas Gas Yorova, Gata in Yorova, the Yobaji Mevas in the Tower live in the Pagas, the Yoma Jua, Gas at Chilagura. That it denigate Demotuva the Yomarwa. Mevas and Dakar would have long on the gas, Lu Zingur, what the Zimba Juba Chica, what is. Mamma Garchet, Demotuva. Demotuva Gawadi.
The way any object appears to consciousness is it appears as being truly existent. And in the case of the self, it appears as if it is independent of the five aggregates. So this is how the self appears to consciousness, as if it is independent, not influenced by the aggregates at all. And this is the meaning of the self appearing to be truly existent or inherently existent. And this is called the self of persons. Such a truly existent self does not exist because true existence itself does not exist. Despite true existence not existing, nevertheless, the object, the self, appears as being truly existent to consciousness, and then consciousness grasps at the self as existing truly. In order to abandon this ignorance that grasps at the self as truly, we need to identify the object of negation, true existence, in order to be able to refute it, to negate it, and thereby abandon the ignorance of self-grasping.
Nadi Ganaska Urilla do the Gataro, she and the Ganaska Urilla, Bene Nazuki, Sugro, Tungu, Ben the Penny, Demo at the Tungu, and then Dipa Gala do, and Jala Shandash Keja do Sparashas in the Penicaguru, Tumbarwa. Dine Gana de Revesan de Marada. That Nazuki Pa Mi, Suchi Tayo do, Su Shandachi Leje, and Pa Gacha, when Gavadi. Penitoya the Meva Society, and the Dine Gata rivers and Dine Mares. Tagarka wars in the Tangazuki, Deshi, Nazanga, Sadi, Kala Yamatu Pumbo down, Pumbong about Karula, and Matuba, Lui Shabala, Matuba, Korongwini, Jubu Yobadi Demo Tubache. That the nigger has a looky, Dinawana, Yore, some Zimbadi, Dinzi Chagola, Yore, some Zimbadi, Dinzi. Denegi Demba Zimba Denzi de Meva Sogor, the Lam Gomje, Denzi de Meva Sobaina, the Ranshing got Dasin Gacha de Colonga Meva Gato, Gata di Temple to be Denzi de Meva Sogor.
How does one abandon true existence? So it's not. Oh, wait, let me. So how does one abandon the object of negation, true existence? Well, it's not like if one is perhaps seeing an object and something else comes before you and you can therefore no longer see it. For example, if you cover your eyes with your hand and you can no longer see what you're looking at, that's not the technique to be employed to abandon true existence. Rather, one needs to identify, recognize what true existence is, and then to see if it exists at all or not. Because what happens now is true existence appears to the mind and the mind grasps at it. So we have a consciousness grasping at true existence. Or to express it differently, it's a consciousness that grasps at true existence as if this is valid, although it doesn't exist. And the way to eliminate this grasping at true existence is done through cultivating the path, cultivating mental consciousnesses. And in this way, one abandons the ignorance, the consciousness that grasps at true existence. Tenzin
Denigi Yore, some Timbe Tenzin, 파 매버 수야라 덴진디 견동고 거래 다코 노트인바다 하고 거르바다 제가 노트인바 하 먹거나 아니 고 매버 수도 말아 제가다 다디 견 통해 매버 수야라 그 진바 나신디 덴버주바 진바 나신디 매바도 또 거르바다 매바데 제가 가사세데 풍보뭐 가로를 略샤발라 마되바 랑원이 주바 나와 나신지 매바 두개 민두 가서 제바지고 거르바다 다 제바제 되네 제바제네 된도 거르 매바도 거르
The way one abandons this consciousness of true grasping, this ignorance, is to recognize that it is a mistaken consciousness, that it's a wrong consciousness. And the way to do that is to come to see how the object appears to oneself, so how the self appears as being truly existent, and then investigate to see if the self exists in the way that it appears. Because the consciousness of true grasping grasps at the self as existing truly. Then one investigates, when one has recognized how or what true existence is, one will understand how the self therefore appears as truly existent, then one examines or investigates, does the self exist in the way that it appears to or not? And when one recognizes that it doesn't exist in this way, that is how one eliminates the ignorance, that consciousness that grasps at the self as existing truly when it does not exist this way.
다니게 제바제 도발라 녀랑아서 가라하고 그러신 덴데게 남샤데 하고 그래 덴데게 남샤하고 덴데게 남샤하고는 덴디마 삼단에 다레라 체거래 산데 덴데게 남샤 삼단에 가서 라바라바세데 삼단에 가서 덴데들에 균디게 덴데세야당 아니 되네 그래서 덴에 답에 덴데세 덴데게 남샤 이치거래 뒤지게 최차상 균디게 덴데 규지래 덴에 제부 가리는 규지래 덴에 깨와마도 안 뒤지게 최 가리는 규래 마덴바 가야요 말에 세대 균디게 덴데 당아도 덴에 라바라바 삼다바네 덴에 마 참아디게 다 디기 규리바 삼다바네 삼다하고 레라로 진짜 덴에 자당 하나서 누구로 지네 지게 힘도로다 덴에 뜬도 가리네 당보 서번 마 답제 델야 안 서번 답아서만 추다 류긴 추다 사자고여바 델라데네 뉴고게 델라데네 제우 메도샤 데네 제우게 데네 제우 롱주여 바딩아서 세브하고 거와 마도 데네 하고 거래 데네 하고 바인자 제우디게 규사번 마다바 제우 용그레랍나 가지고 기네 켈링이 말와다 디가스는 세브하고 사와인자 켈링이 말와 진짜 디 균지게 된데서 디나 데네제 땅아 미로치나 아말레 깨와레스 아만 아메토건마 충준마 깨야 체모 첨부 차와레스 난 데네 미직 아말야 마케바 미가야직 디리 아오다 부지 싸우자 직 아마 균에 메템 부지 깨교 둘랍네 만주 균에 켈링 말와 그래서는 만 미디게 아말 마케지 두스케네 안 깨교바 살롱체네 깨교바 내가서 세브하고 차와자 디하고 아니 켈링이 말아 너트시고 말아 디나신 땅아서 두스 라바삼반네 뒤지게 최 참마라마 가다가네 지네야 다랑기 규 마마치라 마케바 마템바 균에 메바르다 제가 디 메바한테 균지기 덴제 사지 디스 먼저 디 삼다 이게 침무차고 니래
The way to realize that phenomena do not exist in the way that they appear, the way to cultivate this path that leads to the elimination of the ignorance that grasps that phenomena as existing truly, is through the cultivation of the understanding of dependence arising, coming to know the presentation of dependence arising and applying it well. As always, one starts with a coarser presentation so that one can get the method clearly, and then one can progress to subtler objects. So dependence arising we can understand through two forms of dependency. One is dependency on causes and conditions, and the second is mutual dependency. All phenomena that are impermanent, that change momentarily, these are dependent on causes and conditions. All impermanent phenomena are dependent on causes and conditions. So an easy to understand illustration is that a seed is required to give rise to a sprout. So the seed is the cause, the result of that cause is a sprout or a plant. And in order to have this plant, one needs, which is the result, one needs its cause, which is a seed, plus varying conditions, such as the appropriate soil, warmth, moisture, and so forth. And in dependence on the causes and conditions comes about the result. In dependence on the causes and the conditions comes the result. So this is an easy illustration of dependency. So too with ourselves. We all know that we have come from a cause, namely birth from our mother, growth in a womb and birth from our mother. We all know that. And because we know this with certainty, should anyone claim otherwise, we will not believe them. We will readily abandon their opinion as being completely wrong. We will not be deceived by their opinion. And these are two illustrations that are straightforward and easy to understand. We can take them and apply them to all phenomena which change momentarily, impermanent phenomena, because all of them, without exception, are dependent on causes and conditions.
Denegi danga jugi gunje mai bai na da ripajo sujunye na pare da suri sa de suri de par tempare par pajo ridela twene ane suri sa mi da gore da sujo ridela twene pajo ris mi da gore deni gunje mai na chi chi la twene da gore ba deni twe ka sa deni da be deni la gore ji sang ga zo ye da yun xia da ye xia de yun la twene ye xia gore yun la deni ye yun xia gore deni ji da ta de sa ji da ni la na ji le twene ni xia gore ji me na ni xia ya ma ba ji da da ni le twene ji xia gore ma de deni ge du xia ge ji da ji le twene xia gore ji da da ta ba xia ne ki ji juo ye ge ngo bo chi ye ba de la ki ji juo ye ba de la twene ko juo ma do ba za ko la mi ta ba sta gore dan ji da ngo bo de ge ko ta ba de ge ki ji ju ne juo ma do de ba za ngo bo de ki ji juo du ge za de la ta ba de la twe de juo du kan ye ba zo ngo bo sta gore ji da ngo bo ye ba de ta ba la de ne ngo bo sta gore ye ba za ting gore ngo ta ba se de ngo bo chi le de ne ko juo du mi do se ta gore ba chi le twe ne
All impermanent phenomena are dependent on causes and conditions. Permanent phenomena, these are mutually dependent. So if we take, for example, if we take illustrations such as near and far, the concept of something being near and something being far is mutually dependent. They have to be both present. Similarly, or they have to be both. Similarly, with a left and right, there can only be a left if something such as a right exists. Similarly, with one and many, there can only be many if there is a one. There can only be a one if there is many. So then these are illustrations of mutual dependency.
And that dinner Zadang Arzu Lu Dang Arzu Sem Na Chasa Shen Gula Dinner Dune Juba Shen Jilla Dune Juba Delia and it's Lui Pa Ming Dapa Chagurwa Deneji Badi that Dente Sam Da Dene in Zadang Arzu Dadiji Garsos and Arzu Lolia Nga said Dati Nga said Lolipa Nang du Pumbola Matioba Pumbola Dinner Lu Shabala Matioba when you do daddy, then go there. Or did now an ashin daddy da, Gawadus. Now the Pumba da Jedu, Sebachedu, me Pumbodi, Guda, Yen, Shalat in the Trubari. Cesadi, did daddy, now you do Ganla Matioba, Guda, Yen la Matioba, Lu Shabala Matio, Ram when you do by Nangdua, Cesadi Tungum was. Cesadi in Zada, Pumbet and Yemido. The nigga same day, same it and the same day, you don't kill it to a kitchen, same kitchen, chima, the Yamama dinner would do it. She said that it did now and daddy, Kala Matuba, and if you are going to a meeting, now on Ashiji, did daddy, same it and Minduas and better, same da, Gan Pumbota, Sheba, Niggy Dene, Jadu, the niggy daddy, and as a Tungo, the Ragomare.
A further type of dependency is that of imputation by mind, and everything that exists is dependent on imputation by mind. So if we take our body, this requires imputation by mind, as well our individual consciousnesses also require imputation by mind. And these, being both body and mind, being impermanent, are also dependent on causes and conditions. Then go back to what we looked at originally, and that is the self that appears to be truly existent, meaning it appears as if it's independent, not influenced by the body and mind. The body and mind, we can readily see, are dependent arisings, dependence on imputation, dependence on causes and conditions. But the way the self naturally or spontaneously appears to us is as if it is independent of the body and mind. But if we investigate, we come to see that this is contrary to how it must exist, because it is clearly dependent. For example, it changes momentarily. It is not unchanging, and therefore it is mutually dependent. One moment dependent on the prior moment. So therefore, the self cannot exist in the way that it appears as truly existent.
Bendigo now na nga zao ni mindu sanbege samlo na li go ba dinje jesa de mindu se me ba de tong de me ba de da na na zao ni mindu sanbe tong de da dong ba ni ne su da go go ba.
When one identifies then how the self appears as truly existent, then one investigates, is the self then independent of the body? And we'll see actually it's not. There's a relationship of dependency. Similarly, is the self independent of the mind? And again, we'll see there's a relationship of dependency between the self and the mind. So therefore, the self cannot exist independently despite appearing so, cannot therefore exist truly. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing truly. And this is the realization of the emptiness of true existence. Here in the meditation, one comes to realize that having investigated, seeking out the truly existent self, it cannot be found, and therefore it does not exist. But that doesn't mean the self doesn't exist at all. It rather just does not exist in the way that it appears. But it does exist, but in a different manner. It exists as a mere imputation by mind, in dependence on imputation by mind.
And then I said, and then I was a pumbo, Palu, Tabas, Miore, see the pumbo, said the pumbo, Gabriel Suji pumbo, Gabriel Sui pumbo, Gabriel Dushi pumbo, Gabriel Duji pumbo, Gabriel Nambashi pumbo, Pumbanga, Nagala Taba, Tani over. Says I don't answer it down, your bodies, and then can sing Agurel and then answer Rapara some dab in there. Then I answer Pumbola, Tana, your body, said the Carsos, and then I said, sometime the Gabla, Chige, Nazuki. Pumbo di Mishanda ne, Neko Tonson la de Pashu mi Zubu Ton de Neko Tonson pay do legor, Subu de Letene, Hodu legor, Mado, Subu di Mata Vagene, you could do la Midoa. Dinashi, Nade de Side, Mazu Subu di Gujo Mataje, Gamadoji do send Dede by Kabla, Nade de Sade. Then Subu di Gujo Tajama, combat the part of the Toda, Natugu said. This is an Sui Pumbo la Tadirova. Just not done to go to Twig Dunga, Soviet Supolia, Toa Dunga, Gege, Makiva child, not give me do legor. Just not Toa de Kigo, Toa de Kivanza, Toa de la Taj, and I give me. Just not do Chin and Pumbo 풍봉 아볼레 뢰파 따탕디 따지 여바디 나세 지선 되니게 따내 가서 수불라 나데 되기에 나 두고에 나 내가 레게서 가 수불라 따지 나세 뭐에 진고 따고래 지자동 나서 나데 부세네 나도 수부딜레 오 로소 나세디 요말다 니에메데 지선 나도 풍부에 풍봉 아보 가는 게 단위지 차려 단위지 오지바로 차대 오지바 차리마도 풍봉아보다 풍봉알레 로소 오 타데비게 다지 메레 지사디 데젤르 따서디 데네실 라바로 시선 삼단에 데네 차거와 오지바 차리마도 아주 나세디 아주 풍봉아볼레 로소 데다 데메기 된신디 나디 요마로와다 인도와
That's the process first of identifying how the self appears to the mind is of great importance, as is then the second part of the meditation, which is seeking out that self, seeing if that truly existent self can be found anywhere. And this should be done in a wide variety of manners. And one of the techniques is to seek the self amongst the five aggregates. So one looks for a truly existent self, a self that is independent within the form aggregate, the body, and within the mental aggregates, within feeling, within discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness as well, trying to find this truly existent self. And one looks in the body, and we see that no truly existent self is found in the body, but nevertheless, we impute by mind self onto the body. For example, I am sitting. Similarly, we impute self onto feeling. I'm feeling happy. So in this way, we see that the self not only cannot not be found in any of the aggregates, but it is imputed onto the aggregates, imputed by mind. Independence, because we've seen it exists independence on imputation, and it's imputed onto the aggregates. So this shows that the self and the five aggregates are of the same essence.
네, 자당은 저기 최근의 시내야 대신하신 저거 보이나 다 딱바이나 더 유비 최근의 시나 다신 제비체나 안 다신 제바이나 얘기네요 말했어요. 지다다 마다 맞제 바제 안에 tangi도 뢰파 따바쯤 여바래서. 대제사디 tangibe 투모만 비게 따와 차고래.
As mentioned earlier, that every phenomenon appears to consciousness as being truly existent. Whether that phenomenon, and if it's every phenomenon that exists, it would include all those that are impermanent, that change momentarily, and those which are permanent, which do not change momentarily. So all of these appear as being truly existent, but we've heard that true existence itself doesn't exist. So any phenomenon and every phenomenon can be sought, and one will come to see that no truly existent phenomenon can be found, despite appearing to consciousness as existing truly, which means no phenomenon exists in the way that it appears. When sought, that phenomenon cannot be found. When not sought, sure, there is a phenomenon there, but how does it exist? Not truly, but as a mere imputation by mind. So it doesn't exist truly, but does exist independence on imputation by mind, or dependence on labeling by mind, or designation by mind. And this is a unique view of the Prasangika. That then concludes our review of last time. Now we come to something new in the text. So in the middle of page 6, under the new outline, there's a rhetorical a question posed. What is the use of going to all the trouble of first understanding what something definitely non-existent would mean if it were existent, and then, after that, viewing it as definitely non-existent? So the question has those two parts.
That is yin to share or gacha moves on to Kabla Harsene, gacha se lulpa nine the nga said nine the Kabla Ngadi, Pumbo dan Chashi, Lupa Shaba Lamato, Ganglama the Rangun Juba now and Ashinchi, didn't know the gacha relarua. The other person is out in the Yomarelarua. Says Denigi Meba in the Denigi Meba Tilia Anichik. Mevadi denigi deni yores trupten deni trupkore se da hauko wache donda di hauko wache denigi mevaji lia deni samtan liang chigi nyota soga ka mindwa sa disur donda disur ko meva enjang ko samtang ko ko yo marwa sa chi sungor wa da jisa denigi dobasa sigoro.
This is a good question to think about, because what it's saying in brief is, why go to all this trouble thinking about something that doesn't exist at all? Especially when we're only going to come to that conclusion anyway. So the question again, what is the use of going to all the trouble of first understanding what something definitely non-existent would mean if it were existent, and then after that, viewing it as definitely non-existent? So the non-existent that is being referred to in the question is true existence, or inherent existence, or existence by way of its own essence or defining characteristics. Nothing exists in this way. Yet, phenomena, everything we think of, appears to our consciousness as existing in this way, but does not. And when sought, we do not find it. So if it doesn't exist at all, why bother putting all this energy and effort in coming to understand what is meant by true existence, only then to then say it doesn't exist when we look for it, or can't be found when we look for it.
Donda Mayimba Chilla, Donda di Imba Sam Dache, Nanga to Gohor Tepje, Mazur Gyong Ganga Mongore, Yorwasi or that Jitin Yonda Layang to Jitin Nisunaya, Nisu Midemba, Winela, Medemba in the Temper Sunche, the Demba Sam Dache, then the Gohor Tepje, and Nanga to the Ganga Mambuki, Yungu or Wazere, Yong Mamboragi or Wazere.
The answer is quite extensive and starts with, it is common worldly knowledge that by believing untrue information to be true, we fall into confusion and are harmed.
Yeah, and the Niki, then the sweet young Chitin Bana Yungu, but the answer is Silver Water Bene, Jing Meba Chile, Mishanda Chiki Bene, Notrish Machebi in a Waganazu, Topa Saja, Conorichi, such Conorichi, and Conorichi Bachina, the Tunkana Diala Sobata, and Mahobana, Shimju Tire, Shimju Uja Leleche, Oko Nyama Notrichi Mendu, and Conorichi, Nyama Notrichi said no Gorish as Agua Yungurwa. Miji Kuma Ku Meba in there, Kuma Kusha Sache, and the court Nyabata Tunkana Lu, and Mahobana Shimju Uchi. Odi ko nyema de kunu kume de no ru sha sa de ne no ru ngor wa da de so de na ne de san de so mongoli go and di da shin che ani di na shin di me be ge ne da ma ji ji ge be ne takwa sa de dun takwa tabu zhu du na se de ne na che takwa de an du shin de tong de ge takwa de zhu ma le de so zhu zam de ga bu le pen ni zhu ju du sam takwa de pa da ji tong ji ne de lu zhu de jin che an sam le ngam zha da shin na je 용거로 지단 된다 고마라 타고 주 말에 되네 주도 추이제 덴버 진제 중원에 많이 나 중원에 이버 진제네 만술에 시나나 감다요 되네 그 멍불리고로 와 지단 딩아 저기 내가 지금 배중하나 저기 냠녀 여바로 차고로 와다.
It is common worldly knowledge that by believing untrue information to be true, we fall into confusion and are harmed. So for example, if someone is falsely accused of committing a crime, and the accusation is really convincing, despite being false, they may well be imprisoned in dependence on this false information. So clearly this person now has been harmed. And later, if the investigation is finally carried out properly, and they end up being released because the error has been recognized, still they were at least initially harmed. And similarly, the illustration that's more commonly given is when one mistakes a coiled rope for a snake. Fear arises within us, thinking we've seen a snake. But when we notice or recognize that that is not a snake, just a coiled rope, the fear dissipates. But nevertheless, fear had arisen within us, and therefore we were harmed. So these and many other illustrations in society we encounter, all due to mistaking something to be existent when it's not. I would assume in your gardens and homes, and also perhaps in town, there aren't very many snakes around. But where I'm from in India, there certainly are some, and they're dangerous. And so we can easily play jokes on our friends and say, "Oh, there's a snake," and we'll see them step back and some apprehension arise within themselves. But we're only joking. But this is quite easy to deceive someone like that when one is in an area where one knows that there are dangerous snakes. The text then continues, likewise, by believing phenomena to be inherently existent, when in fact they are not inherently existent, we are also harmed. So these two sentences follow closely, because just like in the world, we know that from believing untrue information to be true, we fall into harm and confusion. For example, someone who's falsely accused, and then those in power believe that false accusation will imprison that person, and thereby they are harmed. Similarly, by believing phenomena to be inherently existent or truly existent, when there is no such thing as inherent existence, then we are also harmed. It's from having a view or seeing things, or having a view or a belief or an understanding that is not in accordance with reality that we are harmed. Then the text continues. For example, there is a definite difference between the way the I is apprehended when attachment, anger, pride, and so forth arise based on the I.
Deshi nga lami pa se de nga de deshi nga se de nga tempo tu pa se ju sigor jiza dang nga ju gi nga se de la da dang bo nga se de la nga tempo tu pa ji da nga ta yo ba se de ni che go de jiza nga se de nga nga yo ro ba nga se yo ro ba da nga khala se go nga le ga le yo se nga se ma da ma che ba jin nga ta yo ba se de ni ta yo de ni gi nga shi gong gu ba Denige ngaji mije, denige ngadi le samtang yu, ngadi lo le nangdu ganis nanggoresne, deji sheba nashin, pungpo dan, chashe la matyo ba, lui pa shaba la matyo ba, rangungan yu dhuba nanggore, de jezani ngala mine. De nashin du sampe, deneji yor du sampe zimbal hangi chik ngansu gyolo yor, da ngansu ki ha kutu go mar meba mado, dene ngansu sim ding le ya, dene ngadi pungpo dan, chashe la, lui shaba la matyo ba, rangungan yu dhuba nawa nashin dagaran re sampe ki zimba di ngansu lul hangi de la yobari da ngansu yore.
Here with this bullet point starts an explanation of how we are harmed by believing something to exist that does not, how having this belief or these views that are not in accordance with reality. So the self appears to us naturally, the natural way, the spontaneous way the self appears to us is as being truly existent. So we've heard in the introduction tonight that when one investigates, one cannot find such a self. But when we're sitting here going about our business, the sense of self that appears to us continuously, we are not investigating it, but it appears as if it's something independent of our aggregates, independent of our body, independent of consciousness. And this arises spontaneously and from deep within us due to a strong habituation that the self is something independent or truly existent. From grasping at the self as existing in the way that it appears, as truly existent, then our afflictions follow from this. Afflictions such as attachment and anger, they immediately follow from the ignorance that grasps at the self as existing by way of its own essence.
And dine zinsu da dine control geche pani shen di zinsu nga zinsu chiorwa zinsu chi da dine control ma gi be kabla de da undu ma gyu ase do de da unju ma gyu undu gyur me be ge ba pe be yebe ne gap ge nga zinsu le khabar yus jidan dine gi nga zo control da de cha da control nga ge ge ne an di ne ga so nga se be nga zinsu de da ane tanya control da de cha ka me sim le le Babi yuwi kabla nga sibe samlo da yorwa da nga khala sa go nga chi chi lia ga je simbe samlo yorwa nga sibe nga jinsu ni de lia khabar shu yore jere.
Grasping at the self as existing by way of its own entity, we want to fulfill the needs of this self-existent self, and attachment arises. We want to protect it from harm or repel those who are contrary to what we want, and anger arises. So this happens so readily. Then returning to the text, and the text continues. The way the I is apprehended when we are relaxed without any of those attitudes being manifest. So here there is a difference being drawn on whether in terms of how we relate to the self.
Di zinsunyi le khabar yoras da delia da zinsunyi khabar yoras de da ngangzu lia ji kongro saiwe negap ki ngangzu nga sebe samdai de be chukchimba damdu jingba damdu jingba chegore 나 되네기 지금 심 흘려 예비 갑려야 내가 하스베 삼로지 요르데 징가 징거데 나 담도 징바데 요마 용고 말와 진짜 뒤니기 캬바슈 캬바 예수데 디데도.
The difference between these two circumstances is how tightly we are grasping at the self as being truly existent. When afflictions, especially strong afflictions, have arisen, we are grasping strongly at the truly existent self. When our mind is relaxed and calm and spacious, it's not that the self isn't appearing as truly existent, but our grasping at it is not so tight.
And my better station doors. Tromdo yebig, overshik soda. Tromdo yebig, and the Shindu, Tromdo yebig, overshik, Rangi Manu Gongi, Della Mipig, Lord Zamdan, and Nune Dagri, Shenji, Chane, Sobi, Nerabdu, Loniso, Mobo Della Mipi, Loniga, Miba Jing, Mobi, Nansur, Dendrup the Nansur, now I have Sung. Demba ma tsu tu bigi shinsu yue meba da yubi khebar yus.
The text continues. Similarly, there is the mere consciousness that apprehends an article in a shop before we buy it, and there is the consciousness apprehending that article after it has been bought and grasped with attachment. Both these consciousnesses have the same object, and in both cases, the way the article appears is as appearing to be truly existent. However, there is a difference as to whether or not we cling to it as being self-sustaining or truly existent.
Danire 당한적이 잘라지 총알을 잘라주면은 당한적이 잘라된 많이비 갑라 먼저 잘라들이 진출로지다 잘라도 소식이 뉘에 산에 안 잘라들이 미비기 먼저 진출시로이데 가르쳐 봐 요래랍나 많이 강라 잘라들이 미네 로디당 뉘에 산에 잘라 진비로니라 유지과를 잘라디 유지과 차되게 나야라 데모주바 나와야 데모주바 니가라 데모주바 난고래 나서야 난고래 유야지 버래 데모주 나지 버려서 이내 캐바를 가르요래랍나 많이 관계기 니에게 르디기 유들의 미네 진비갑데 진바 중화마도요 말았어 남도 진바리요 말다 데모주바 진바디 바시요 말 데모주바 진바리요 말했더라 데모주바 진배 말해 다 내내기 당한 주기 뉘 사제 소속이 진요도 갑라 곧 랑기 다그리 제제 된 될이야 아직 다그리 제네 짐바 아니 지금 템바 짐바 리긴 서다 템바 짐바 리고래 다그리 제네다 다그리 제네서 이 삼제 땅 이 삼제 대배 야고레스 대신 나와나 신지 야고레스 짐바디 된제 가서래 템바 짐바 짐비기다 로 가서 담도 짐바 리고래 제네
So again, looking at this paragraph, there is a mere consciousness that apprehends an article in a shop before we buy it, and a consciousness apprehending that article after it has been bought and grasped with attachment. Both these consciousnesses, so before and after the object is bought, have the same object, and in both cases, the object appears as being truly existent. So that's the similarity between these two consciousnesses. They have the same object, and the object appears as truly existent. The difference then comes in terms of the strength of the self-grasping and the resulting way one relates to the object as mine. Once it's been bought, it's now mine. And this is where the difference can be seen. And that we have in the last sentence. However, there is a difference as to whether or not we cling to it as being self-sustaining or truly existent. So this clinging comes from this apprehension of it being mine, and mine comes about in dependence on there being an I.
담도 짐바 예매데 간다 하고 그래서네 베네 소수기 베네 라도 가봐 야고라시메 있나 수수의 만유 강라 안딜이야 안지 미션다지 라반마 쇼르체 차주 차반의 철로조베나 먼저 삼나 칼리게스는 어다디 지기 됐어 디마서 선배 삼로 용어도 용그리마도 이제 숙침부시라요 말아 소수의 뉘에 차내다 소수의 뉘에선 소소랑 라발레 사와 있나 레산에 내네 디마 차와 있나 사바나 하는 거 가서 로함디베 로함 숙체 용구도 하다 하고야 봐다 아주 많이 걸어 차와있나 아니 미션에 걸어 저기 차주바네 로함시라 말이야 뉘에 사는 아주 뉘에 아주 라발레 사제 당 아주 저기 차주바있나 로함시라 용한테 제가 대시 담도 진배 담진도 숙체버여 봐인자 내가 로함대 숙체 용거래 대시 담도 진배게 숙 로대 숙충주마도 매반자 로함대 숙충마도 매네
Take an illustration. If you're in a shop and you're looking to buy an expensive mobile phone, and whilst you're looking at it, you drop it, well, oops, like that, no big deal. After you buy it, if you drop it then, immediately you'll feel a strong apprehension arising within yourself, and you'll grasp at that phone, pick it up to see if it's marked. So the phone's the same. It's a passage of time of perhaps just a few minutes. But in the first instance, it wasn't yet mine. In the second, it was. The difference there is in relation to the strength of the self-grasping.
다 되샤 기그리에서 되샤 코로나 간에 찔랭아도 되샤 레고레스 배 야고도 선배 삼로데 되샤 레베스 딩알 고우도 선배 삼로데 되샤 레베스 오고 니콜라 닝제 선배 삼로데 되샤 레베스 또 심주 제반나도 되샤 세대 간에 닝제 선배 삼로 쇼로와 오고 닝제 선배 삼로 쇼로와 삼로데 도 되샤 레베스 어디 야고도 선배 삼로데 되샤 레베스 어디알 고우도 선배 삼로데 되샤 레베스 되샤 호랑아 덤빈지 되샤 희고로 와다 되샤서 로간의 찔레 되샤 레고레 디스 삼로디기 되샤 간에 간에 디레베 삼다베나 되샤 차기도 차기면서 사세 디 야고도 디 나로 고고도 디 야고도 디 고고도 인제 세베 삼로디비 되샤 레베 말레스.
So in that illustration we see that what changes is a strength of self-grasping, and therefore the resulting strength of the sense of mine. And from this sense of mine, that is now so much stronger, there is the attachment for this object, for the phone, and therefore the reaction when we think we may have damaged it. So what is this mind of attachment? So attachment is the thought of I want attachment, the thought of I need? Is that attachment? Is the thought of this is good? Is that attachment? What about compassion? Is that attachment? It can actually be quite difficult to recognize what is attachment.
메도 닝지우도 선배 삼로디 가보인 메도 데데 닝지우 선배 삼로도 메도지 닝지우 죄나 아즈리 디 메도 닝지우도 선배 삼로 연구래 안에 장유 선바다 자준 받들이 데 닝지우도 선배 삼로 연구로와 제가 닝지우도 선배 삼로디 되샤 임바이나 녀몽바 방차간 자준 발에 데 닝지우도 선배 삼로 연구도와 제가 되샤 책임도와 제자데 자준바디 녀모 방사인데 되셔 응마로와 제 매나 닝지보이나 응원에 닝지보치는 닝지도 선배 삼로 용구로와 제자디 닝지보 메도데다네 메도 닝지도 선배 삼로디 되셔 책임도와 메도데 갈로 고우도 선배 삼로디야 되셔 책임도와 제자한테도 심주 제외나 닝지보도 선배 삼로셔로와 So let's
take, for example, a flower. We see a flower, We see that flower as being beautiful. So is this attachment or not? So we as very ordinary beings, we see the beautiful flower, but a foe destroyer, an arhat, can see that same flower and also see it as beautiful. So both of us are seeing it as beautiful. But is that necessarily attachment?
And digi and nga said that nga let you go to the ngay said nga le go said the ngay tao to some big ngay some the kiro, ngay tao to some big. Then Mahaji died in Medosh Tongrua, Dambo Miglia Medodi Sharua. That Dambo Sharon to Kablan as a Dushiki or Mare, Metod me be Dushiki or Mare Dambone. The Metod Dambo as a Miglia Sharon to Kabla, Della DJ Carlson, to me, Jiglo said Gigore. Metod you Korong and Ninchi would you hear the Dele Laba Jota Big Law, Dele Ninchi, Dele Korong a Tse Dele Laba Che, Laba Davigi, to me, Lochiki or Dele to me, Jiglo Lagore. Dele Benemedo della Korongi Ninji which you ever, Chidaya was in Korea, Delia Lapa Drotaci, Delia Lapa Tabi, Cele Gavik, Tabi Lochligore, the Sumiji Loche. That Cele Gavik, Tabi Lodi, Cele Gawa Tabi, the Nigga Cele Gavik Medode, you're the best of your Marwa de Cele Gawa de Marwa, she's not Cele Gawa Tabi Medodella. Ding Haloku, some business. The hour Ding Haloku, some like you did to a child. Celekawa. Cesene did Cesrua, they can have one Celekawa, Mount Havadua, Common Gamma to many gather Chictula and Celekawa. Cesar Ninji was a year, the Koran year, the Delia Lupa Daj, Cele, Dilla Hapachi, Ninja would delay, Mahaji, Ninja was shook shed, Ninja shook chair Dacia. Shukche da do that shukche da to drop us on one. Then they shukche da yin that the niggy shukche da you can give you metal delia thing alcohol simply Lochkevan di chapare, de share.
So ourselves as ordinary beings are very different from the foe destroyer. The foe destroyer or the arhat has completely abandoned self-grasping together with its seeds. So they have attained liberation. For ourselves, as ordinary beings who have not at all, when we see this beautiful flower, the first moment that we see this flower, it appears to our mind, and in that first moment we don't necessarily have attachment for it. So this flower appears to our consciousness, it appears as being truly existent, and then follows a consciousness called improper mental engagement. And this serves the function of embellishing or exaggerating the qualities of the object. So that this flower, perhaps this beautiful flower, is seen as more beautiful than is correct, than in accordance with reality. And that is the role that improper mental engagement plays. It embellishes the characteristics or the qualities of the object. And this embellishment is not in accordance with reality.
Andinigi Geshe said, Tsumi Yu Dela, that metal Peshawar, that's an Yu got the kind and to Yu Dela maybe Geshe Chapaki Vena, Dambo Yu di Tong, then the Yu Dela, Tsumi Lodi, Korongi, ni to Dela, Labachi Drotache, you don't watch in the Idu only Labachi Drota. Then you drop out big Yu Dela and Dingala Dela Debig Debi Lodida, Chapa said, Chichagore.
First, the sequence here is first the object appears to consciousness. So one sees the flower, it appears then to our consciousness, and we then the consciousness of improper mental engagement embellishes the qualities of that or the characteristics of that object, and then follows the affliction, in this case, attachment.
지나다 컨트롤해야 돼 지거래. 컨트롤해야 돼. 컨트롤해야 돼. 당보는 안 저기 유지 통제, 유통에 내가 취미지를 줬다지. 줬다고 그래. 지난 저 가르다고 그러서는 이도 묘 이도 그런 세례 가위 이도 묘 왔다지. 그 노트이 봐 세례 가위卷大제. 그卷지 통 되네게 卷代于逻辑给我的最密切是我的되네게 卷代于逻辑给呢되네게切来改为个代表语的他得了马个为什么给的控制是我的控制是
It's the same process then for the affliction of anger. An object appears to consciousness, and then improper mental engagement embellishes the characteristics of the object, in this case the unpleasant aspects. The faults or the unpleasant aspects of the object are embellished, and then anger or aversion to that object arises. So we have this process of first the object appears to consciousness, then its characteristics are embellished by improper mental engagement, and then the affliction arises.
안데네게 다른 저기 녀모바 칸시게 위네 되샤 콘드롱아게 지니엘이야 다른 다신 당봉아서 다신 마릭바세시게 안디 온게다 당아세데 나스비체 되는 게 있어야 된 나이로와 진비진바게 되네 추미지로 추미지 유디데다데 통위게다 수다 미딘비게 수대 미딘바세 외니 수대 미딘비게 삼로시다 될 유디라선 되네 두스비 삼로 쪼다지 삼로다 안델라는 되바기야다 차와 미디바기야데 안에고 그사데다 마하와기야도 콘로세다 두스는 녀모기야 차사 바라들이야 다 추미지 로지 쪼다 되는 녀모바기 고르지라
This sequence then that applies to all objects and afflictions. So first, we already have the ignorance of self-grasping, and with the grasping at the self as being truly existent comes this, with this I, sense of I, truly existent I, comes the mine. And thereafter the object that appears to one, then this has its characteristics embellished, and this is done by the consciousness that is improper mental engagement. And this embellishment is not in accordance with reality. And thereafter come the afflictions. And this is the sequence, as we've heard, with attachment, with anger, but with other afflictions too, such as pride and jealousy.
되샤데 베네 대시 추미 유이텔라 추미제 따여도 가로 추미제데 뭐 그런 이도 원서라 하바 삼다야 직제 베네 메도라시데 다 메도데 우이니스데 미딘바 삼다야 제책으로 우이니스데 우이니스 미딘바서 나여도 가블라 로디가 어데 메도데 베 나여도 가블라 가서 베 야고도 스미데 하바지 좋다시 되는 나와 신지 될에 나여도 가를 가르난 거선다 강라이 마토바 略下巴了嘛，让我们的主办难过的。但那个让我们的主办那完那心的，刚来嘛对吧？让我们的主对给你买多点俩，吃法什么当完吃法基本呢，顶下过吃法基本呢，但那个吃法的对吃的，点子下的点子买多点把这个这边点子下的买多了吃呗吃法了你个的。买多是能够的，现在买多能有的刚来呀，没得把可能我们主办能够的吧，略怕下巴了，让我们主办能够的吧，但是那那些的那个买多的，大家来百年就都的那个过程本呢，的电信查出过来。
So all afflicted minds, anger, attachment, and so forth, arise from or are preceded by the improper mental engagement. And this is the consciousness that embellishes the characteristics of the object, either exaggerating good characteristics or exaggerating the faults of the object. So therefore, it's not in accordance with reality, because it's embellishing the faults or the good qualities of the object. So for example, when one sees a flower, one sees it as the flower appears to consciousness, then its beauty is embellished, and one takes this now extraordinarily beautiful flower as existing truly. This incredibly magnificent, this exaggerated, magnificent flower is seen as truly existent. And thereby we have both attachment and grasping at the true existence of the object present. So both ignorance and attachment.
자산 디카레 군주베단 두디야기네 지연하면나 카레 가샤베 두디 초야기 연하면나 지우디와디야 코스사 카레 군샤로와 카레스나 카스나 카레 군샤로와 지우나야리아 지견야 연하면나 그래서 디 지금은 예는 아주 지우다 뒤서를 샤쇼선
It's now 20 past 8. If you can ask questions through your masks, please feel free to ask. If the mask is too much of a hindrance, well then silence will have to do.
샤상한테 삼다 되네야 다도 주비 진나데 삼다 지 가자데티 마삼다라 디디레 지나데데 송은 되시 당보로를 파도 신에 당봉아도 덴디게 균디게 덴디게 남자디게 바삼야고 땅 안디제야 나서 로리야 철도 간에 철도 스메도 지나고 삼다 덴디 차와 나신지 나디 먼저 풍부되다 가라도 민도세데 도스는 삼다야디 도스는 자기도와 데네자다 데네체 데네 아주 될 때네 되지 묘모바게다는 취미지기 남도 데네티 기고를 해셔야 돼마 디주 삼다나데 도스는 다 디셔버래 다 디링 디체 then
So just before we take questions, to briefly summarize what we looked at tonight. So first of all, we recapped what we looked at in the previous weekend. That is, all phenomena appear to consciousness. So everything we think of appears as being truly existent. And the meaning of true existence or inherent existence or existing by way of its own nature or characteristics is that it appears to be independent. The object has its own essence, its own entity. It doesn't appear to be dependent on anything, but exists by way of its own essence. So if it's the self appears to exist by way of its own essence, and therefore it's not influenced by consciousness or by the body. So this is how phenomena appear to the mind. Then one needs to investigate whether phenomena exist in this way or not through the presentation of dependent arising. So that was the recap. And then tonight we also looked at or introduced the concept of improper mental engagement. So the self appears to ourselves as being truly existent, and with this appearance of I, the truly existent I, in dependence on the strength of this, there is a strength of mind. The weaker we are grasping at the self, the weaker comes the resulting sense of I, the sense of mind, sorry. And here we saw the difference in the text between an object before you buy it and immediately after. The sense of grasping at that object is now much stronger. And thereafter we also looked at the role of improper mental engagement in that this exaggerates the characteristics of the object, either exaggerating the good qualities or the faults of the object. And that then precedes the arisal of the afflictions. So that's then a brief review. So then we can take some questions.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, maybe I misunderstood something here, but when you talk about the flower and an arahat seeing the flower and seeing the beauty in the flower, it seems to be that that's still a subjective thing. So I imagine an arahat to have something which transcends subjectivity. in terms of their perception. So maybe I've misunderstood, but I can't see there being beauty in the flower in and of itself.
So, can I ask it like this? Can Genla say something more on how an arhat or a fur destroyer will see a flower as beautiful?
Yeah, and if there is like an objectivity to beauty, as in, it seems like there's an independent, it seems like the way it's being explained or how I've interpreted what's being said is that there's something in the flower that's beautiful in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then there's an exaggeration on top of that.
Yes.
But my mind is saying there isn't something in and of itself that's beautiful at all.
Okay.
And so therefore, why does an arahat see something as beautiful, or see a thing as beautiful as the flower?
Because the way I'm understanding what I've heard tonight is that if something is seen as beautiful, this comes about in dependence on the exaggeration or the embellishment of some inherent quality of beauty. And therefore this is exaggerated. But an arhat wouldn't see the object in this way because the arhat doesn't see the object, the flower, as existing by way of its own essence. Okay.
Suyina, mentok ninja potongdu, dene rangsing ki drupa tongi yade, dene rangsing ki drupa mentok de ninja joda kare, dene jachong da nojo de shortin rana.
Rajum bala nadu rangsing ki drupa nangu omarwa, de karsne kasore. Kanshi le ngarang zugin medo de nyingjibu chue na ngarang zudan ane de tachunpa nile nangwa na nang na jiba nangorwa de ngarang zuge karasi worsne tsumi jigi jota gorwa jota ge de honsel haba jota gorwa tsumi jigi jota gorwa ngarang zuge sora ngarang zuge medo de pa nyingjibu da de tsumi jigi jota nyingjibu da gorwa 다좀 베게디 투미지게 줬다요 말와 가서 녀모 방사로와 투미지게 줬다야 걸 매버와
데네 투미지 매나 칸드스 닌저포 나기여레
닝지워스는 그런 게 레베 차지 요로와 가지고 뭐네 그런 레고 요로와 다 가지를 단 그런 게 그런 매도 그런 지당 저기 직대나 약보다 약보 말세 요로와 돼 직대나 약보래세 약보디 요로와 요대로와 무인이슬 지 요로와 약도 이케버 요로바다 진짜 약보 되는 약아디 약에 차들을 인지부시 거로바다 인지울래.
So you're correct in saying that the flower doesn't appear to be truly existent to the arhat, and because they are arhat, they don't have any improper mental engagement, exaggerating the qualities or the characteristics of the flower. So you're correct there. Where there's a similarity between ourselves and the foe destroyer, or the arhat, is that to both of us, the foe destroyer and ourselves observing the same flower appears to our separate consciousnesses, but to our consciousness it appears as truly existent, and we then exaggerate its good qualities. To the arhat, that same flower appears to their consciousness, but not as truly existent, and there is no exaggeration of its qualities or embellishment of its qualities. So there you are correct. Nevertheless, in accordance with the world, to the consciousness of the arhat, that flower appears as beautiful, because in accordance with the world, such an object, such a flower, is beautiful. So it appears to them still as beautiful, but not due to an inherent quality within the flower. The way the flower appears to the arhat is in accordance with reality, and within the reality of our world, such an object is perceived as beautiful.
Dada chachumba se de nyanjue da rangja chachumba ina ko medo na do pashi temba tuban nang mare se de mare temba tuban nang go gasen tenzin ki pasha ye de ro pasha wange temba tuba tin nang go re nangor ina khonzo la temba tu resmi shenpa ki go mare shenpa yung go lo dingla dingi nawa na shin chi de yo mare sambe samlo ma do nawa na shin di shenpa de yo mare ta nga zu gyula nangor nawa na shin shenpa yo re andi insa shenpa yo ban sa ndele ya nga zu ge kasro re mutsumi ji ge ta go re dan ta ban sa nga zu ge la di ya ji de due sha ki yo re dai mini rajun ba de la nangor de ina nawa na shin ji yo mare sam go ro so je san di nawa de shenpa me re shenpa di shenpa zimpa de yo mare je san shenpa me ba re shenpa me ban sa pigi de la ya tsumi ji ge ta yo mare就这代没完上，你得对些见面吧的，还是对些见具有嘛，的身体的。
Just correct what I said there. So for the here and solitary realizer arhat, for them, there is still an appearance of true existence, but they have no clinging to that appearance of true existence. Because they've abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds, but not their imprints. So there is still an appearance of true existence, but there's no clinging. Because there's no clinging, there's no improper mental engagement and no attachment. So for ourselves, not only is there appearance of true existence, but we grasp at it or we cling to that. And then this is followed by the improper mental engagement and attachment.
Petsen Shempa, Duatana, Pena Chirpa Chik Nyambade. Then you draw Chompa Chirpa de Chikpatona, Myamba, how old it is, or Tongi, answer than Chikpade, in a dance in your matter. Because Kongi Dokpa To, Metal Te Kandris, Ninja or Senda Chavia, because Ninja or Kitcher De, Yula, Yomade, then he Kandris.
Yulu yo marasina yu khron la lekni ge chaji yorba yu la lekba da melekba sa ji chaji yorba ben shin chine shin le yu le chakpo da ni bu se ji khabar yorba da ben khashe ben medo khashe ya duten je yes yaga na khashe la ji chondo ine khashe chondo le ji khabar yorba de one khron 유리야 뒤팅이 토네 그런 유코로는 뭐에 전에 개발 가시 개발 여러 매도 가시래 개발 여러 받이
Just ask then again further to say something about how the flower can appear as beautiful, because if it doesn't exist, if the characteristic of beauty doesn't exist in the flower, how does the flower appear as beautiful? He replied by saying the objects do have characteristics that are in accordance with reality. Those characteristics are not inherently existent though, but they do have characteristics that are in accordance with reality. For example, wood is hard, is firm. Some flowers are perhaps wilting, others are fresh. So there are these characteristics. But what's the difference between how we perceive it and grasp, and how it only appears but is not grasped at by a foe destroyer, an arhat, is in terms of its inherent existence. But there are characteristics to an object, but those characteristics aren't inherently existent. For example, wood is hard.
So is beauty kind of a fixed characteristic like heart? Like it's a fixed characteristic that exists like heart?
So is beauty a fixed characteristic like hard?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then a sing drop for that. Then a day, 10 and a kitchen drop for that, 10 in a metal, come ninja for in a mina, kitchen there.
That in the Benarzo Medo Nivache, Medo Jigma, Medo Sharshin by Shars in the Shama Tawan, Shardukanchik, Medo Mao Sibai Shardage. Medo Jig the Mao the Shards and Nimakashi in the Nimbo chatting, Jenna, after the Medo Nijo, the Nimba Mundulagroa. Says Denigi, server Yuting and Jida, Nimba charge, server medican, bed chicken. 나보다 되게 이거 자료지나 니니데 안줬다도 네가 서버 여바지나 또 닝부 사이데 뭐니 수도 여대로 와다 거기 여러 와베니 세상 아주 가서네 세워서야 돼 니조도 라디 닝고 차등에 돼 닝보민도 야고민도스 아주 디 담그러와 디나신 자주 받다베네 세워서야 차다 닝니니바니디 차바데 동고로와 이 지과로와.
We have two flowers. One is fresh and beautiful. The other is a little old and wilting and dying.
Beautiful, you know, that one, the beautiful lesson. They go and need to learn.
Did you super?
Oh, so.
So the one is fresh and the other is dying, and so then what is in accordance with reality is the fresh one is the beautiful one, and the dying one is not.
Sorry to hold the question, so just someone might perceive. I think I'm seeing it as subjective. Like someone might see the wilting dying flower as more beautiful than someone who sees.
So if the wilting flower is in accordance with reality, that wilting flower is not beautiful, that surely someone though can still see it as beautiful. So then, therefore, it cannot be said to be in accordance with reality.
But is that in accordance with reality?
Yes.
For me,
yes.
A wilting flower is not. My perception, I'm not saying this is correct.
Yeah.
A wilting flower, a dying flower, is not more beautiful in accordance with reality than a fresh flower. To me, that's just a subjective perception.
Yeah.
Of course, most people see the fresh flower as more beautiful,
Yeah.
but that, to me, is entirely subjective.
Yeah. Okay.
Then metok chik server chik chidiades. Then de ngoine sogan tupore. Hinin chepo yilamida. Ngoine sogan tupore. Because mi chik di shiva metote o ni chepo sam sikil.
Di ngādu jīyōngwa chāni ki shīgōrwa, jidāna ngādu jikdī nā chābīgi, jikdī yōngdā ki shētāla dā, mi jikli dā samsība yōnggurē dī, inā jīyōngwa chāni shēbatā ngādu ki jikdī yōngdā la, dī ngī kā nīngshē dō sīn sōywa dī nīngshē dō lagirwa, dī jīyōngwa chāgirwa. Tā dī dī jīyōngwa chāni, kō mātā māchēba jikdī yōngdā ki shētā dō chāni shēyarwa. Tā dēlā, dā kōyō dīni tōnggū dō, ngē dīni tōnggū dō, 아니디 대닝조데 거기리에서 나가도 두친데 제바 제용은 닌지부터 녀해요 말해. 제바 제나 안에 랑문에 두배 동아차 동번이 원래요 그래.
예선은 나오가 걔는 대표 볼에서 군속된다.
예.
So for something to be called beautiful or not, these two flowers, is in accordance in accordance with what is generally accepted in the world. So this aspect of beauty or lack thereof to the flower is what would generally be accepted within the world. And that doesn't exclude that an individual will have their own unique take on it. So, but in general, what's accepted in the world is this is beautiful, that is not beautiful. Or this characteristic is seen in this way or that way, yeah? And with however an individual sees it, whether uniquely or in the general sense, when one investigates, cannot be found. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.